our subconscious was populated by other people. So we have no control over the color of our skin, over the language we speak, over the number of brothers and sisters we have, over the vocation of our parents. None of those things are in our control, but all of those things have a huge impact in how we make decisions, unless we start to change our own mind.
You are listening to 5 a.m. podcast. Your morning motivation starts here.
Welcome to the 5 a.m. podcast. I'm your host, Michael Clausen. Today, we are joined by a man who has lived at both ends of that performance spectrum. Patrick Sweeney was an Olympic-level athlete and five-time founder who, by his own admission, spent years paralyzed by fear, terrified of flight, board meetings, and losing his best people. Now, everything changed after a near-death experience in his early 30s. That forced him to confront the legacy hardware in his brain. Since then, he's transformed himself into a record-holding pilot, a Wall Street Journal best-selling author, and a neuroscience expert who has interviewed the top minds at Harvard, MIT, and Tufts. Now, today, Patrick is on a mission to help 1,000 founders become unicorns by closing the belief gap. He's here to teach us how to use the Buddha loop to make fearless decisions and turn fear into fuel. Patrick Sweeney, welcome to the 5 a.m. podcast.
Hey, Michael, thank you so much for having me here. Great introduction. I appreciate that. My mom would be proud, and I'm really happy all
That's
the
good.
listeners
Thank you
tuned
very
in.
much.
Sure.
Yes, absolutely. So, Patrick, you mentioned that we all have this legacy hardware in our brains. So some people might say it's a 2 million old lizard brain. Some might just say it's a fallen human condition. How does that ancient biology sabotage a modern founder's decision making?
So the brain is an absolutely incredible organ, and we didn't really understand it. We didn't have a mapping of the brain that everyone agreed on, that neuroscientists agreed on. 2016. So,
Okay.
so just 10 years ago, when
Wow.
we knew how the pancreas and the digestive system and everything else in the body worked, but we didn't know the brain. So what we've come to find out is there are a lot of shortcuts and a lot of things the brain does to be hyper efficient, even though it's the most fuel using part of the body. So it makes up about roughly about 2% or 3% of, I think, of our body weight, something like that. It's a couple kilograms of weight, but it uses 20% of our energy. Right. And that's the big trade-off, because it's constantly going. And what it's trying to do, the main goal of the brain is to basically procure our genes onto the next generation. So what we're trying to do is survive and procreate. And that's the idea behind the brain. That's what it's taught to do. That's what that 2 million-year-old piece of software in your fear center is trying to teach you. And that's called the amygdala. It's about the size of an almond gland, and it's in the very oldest part of your brain. The newest part of the brain is the prefrontal cortex. And you can think of it as almost like an iPhone. So it's got thousands of applications that it can call on, but you can only have one thing on the screen at the same time. So when we get scared or we perceive anything that we have difficulty predicting, so it's called prediction error, then what happens is our amygdala immediately hijacks that prefrontal cortex. So now you can think of this in really specific situations, like if you're walking through the grass and you see a snake and all of a sudden you turn and run the other way, or you freeze, or you have a reaction that's one of these shortcuts that's helped you survive or helped your ancestors survive. And that's a good thing. But when it becomes a bad thing is when you're in a meeting and someone says something about the quality of your work or what you chose or why you did this investment, and the amygdala thinks, okay, I'm going to get put out of the pack. And when we get rejected by our own pack, that means we go out in the wild to die because we're not together anymore. So this guy's rejecting me from our tribe, from our pack, and my amygdala is going to immediately jump into action, take over that prefrontal cortex, and either fight, flight, or freeze. And so that's the way the brain mechanisms work, and that's what's not serving us in a modern day world where we don't have to worry about being rejected from the tribe or not being able to have children or any of the things that would have gotten us killed in the, ancestral days.
Yes. That's right. Well, and going back to the Stoics, Seneca, who is a fellow who I like to read, and he said there are more things, Lucilius, likely to frighten us than there are to crush us. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. And you and I were talking before I hit the record button, you're more likely to die from a lunch than you are from a shark attack. Can you talk a little bit about that fear versus reality?
Sure. And I think it helps if we classify three different types of fear, what I call the fear triangle.
Okay.
So on one side,
Okay.
you've got physical fears, and that might be falling off a cliff, for example. The other side, you've got emotional fears, and that's the being rejected from the tribe kind of things. Those are the psychological ones. So the on the bottom you've got the physical fears, and really what those are things like snakes and sharks and that sort of thing. And what we've got in that triangle is you could have multiple parts, right? It's an overlapping degree of either instinctual or emotional that start to create problems for us. And when we get into understanding what fear is there for, only to keep us alive, our mind and that software doesn't care about our happiness. It doesn't care about our career. It doesn't care about what our goals are and our desires in life. So when we make a decision only one of two ways. We either make a decision out of fear because the amygdala has pushed us in one direction and we're trying to avoid that. We're trying to fight or flight from that. Or we make a decision out of opportunity. When we make a decision out of fear, it almost always leads to regret. We make a decision out of opportunity, then that opens up so many more doors for us. So that's the little bit of the decision making process in our brain.
Right. That's really good. And we're certainly fearfully and wonderfully made, as scripture says. It's amazing, though, too, how we have the DNA of our ancestors. Some people say we stand on the shoulders of giants, but it almost seems like we can have fears that have been passed on to us from previous generations. Did you find that and maybe a solution to that in your research?
Sure. You know what's crazy? One of the things in the research that came up, Michael, that most people probably don't know is that we can pass on our fears in one generation. So it doesn't have to be an evolution where it takes 10 generations for our genetic makeup to change, our DNA to change. We can do it if, my mother was afraid of flying, then I'm going to be born and I'm going to inherit that fear of flying. And her behavior, most likely, is going to make that even stronger. Right, because it's going to validate that fear for me when I'm trying to learn about different fears. So that epigenetics, that ability to pass on within a single generation, is hugely important. Now, the great thing is if we slow the brain down, then we can consciously change our internal measures of fear. So what I mean by that is normally our subconscious makes about 80% of the decisions for us. So when you see someone, if you're walking down a dark street all by yourself and you see someone coming the other direction, the first thing your brain does, which is a shortcut, it uses only half the hemisphere for this. It makes a decision. Do I want to kill that guy or do I want to mate with that guy? That's really what it boils down to, what these shortcuts are for. Is that a threat or is that someone who's part of my tribe and I want to be with? And so if you stop and you question that moment and you say, okay, I'm being judgmental. How can I change that judgment into curiosity? And then you're actually engaging the second part of your second hemisphere. So you're not no longer using those shortcuts and you can change your future past by doing things this way. So I know that sounds a little bit trippy, but the idea
Yeah.
is that our subconscious was populated by other people. So we have no control over the color of our skin, over the language we speak, over the number of brothers and sisters we have, over the vocation of our parents. None of those things are in our control, but all of those things have a huge impact in how we make decisions unless we start to change our own mind. The only way you can change your own mind is to have a new experience. Then that goes into your memory. And then when you go to make that quick decision next time, then that memory pops up that you populated in your subconscious mind. So that's how we can change our decision making process. Is we have to basically hit the kill switch, hit the stop button, and then say, okay, I
Yeah.
just made a judgment about this person or about this situation. How can I replace that with curiosity? And when you do that, your entire life changes because you're the architect of your internal decision-making process.
Right. And even in modern marketing and on social media, we see people trying to get us into that curiosity loop to take us down a thread. But I want to ask you about a statement you were making about the fear tells, those psychological signals. Maybe they're butterflies or they're a tight chest. Why is it vital for a leader to identify these before walking into a high stakes meeting?
So one of the things, Michael, I do every year, I'm part of this group of CEOs called YPO, Young Presidents Organization. And I do probably 10 or 15 events every year for different YPO chapters in different cities all around the world. And what we try and do is put them in the most high stress situation we can get them in. Because what happens when we've rappelled off cliffs, we've gone bungee jumping, we've lots of cold plunges, boa constrictors, tarantulas, you name it, all things to get someone triggered to a moment of peak stress. So this is really critical, especially for leaders and entrepreneurs. And it's one of the things I talk about in my new book, The Founder's Creed, that leaders have to understand their own physiology and the changes that take place. Because what you correctly cited from my book, Fear is Fuel, is that we have fear tells. So the way our genetic makeup handles that amygdala hijacking. Remember, when the amygdala tries to take over that prefrontal cortex, what happens when the amygdala tries to hijack your brain, it releases all these chemicals, norepinephrine, DHEA, cortisol, and they all start coursing through your body. When that fear cocktail, as I call it, when that starts moving through your body, you're going to feel the same thing you feel all the time. And it goes in varying degrees of intensity, depending on the level of fear. But if the phone rings and you're worried about making payroll and you're thinking, oh, it's your banker calling, you're going to get the same fear tell as if you're on the edge of a cliff and it's a 30-foot drop down and you've got to jump to impress your friends. You're going to feel the exact same tells. And so for some people, that's a clenched jaw, pulled up shoulders, butterflies in the stomach, a brick in the stomach, right? I've seen all sorts of things in all the CEOs that we've done. But the key thing to do, and this is why I tell people they should scare themselves every day, the key thing is to find something that scares you and then kind of take a mental time out and say, okay, where am I feeling this? Because when I go up on stage, I did this keynote talk for the National Franchise Association, 4,000 people, Caesar's Palace in Vegas, and I called people up on stage, right, on this giant stage. And I always look for the most shy person in the audience. When I say, okay, I'm going to bring some volunteers up here, people go like this and try and hide. Those are the ones I pick. So these people are terrified coming up on stage, but what they're learning, and when I ask them, I said, how do you feel? They say, I feel scared. Right? That isn't a feeling. Scared isn't a feeling. I want them to describe the physical feeling they feel in their body. And it's been all over the place from, as I said, from butterflies to tight muscles or what have you. But once you recognize them, then the next week I tell everyone, look, here's what you can do in the next 48 hours to take action on this. You're going to look for moments when you feel that exact same thing. Maybe it's lower intensity, maybe it's higher intensity, but you're going to feel that because that's your warning bell that you're either going to make a decision out of fear and listen to that amygdala hijacking, or you're going to make a decision out of opportunity. And those fear tells, understanding what you feel when the plane's hitting turbulence, or when the person is asking you up for karaoke, or whatever it is that scares you, you're going to feel those things. So that's why I think everyone should go out and scare themselves every day. They start to get used to that feeling, and then they say, okay, all right, I know the amygdala is trying to take over. I'm going to do a couple deep breaths, what I call 4x4s. Navy SEALs call it box breathing. And I'm going to do a couple deep breaths, and I'm going to take back control of my brain, shut that amygdala off, and I'm going to make a really good decision. Because when you're at a point of heightened fear, you actually are set up genetically to have the best performance mentally and physically of your life. And that's why you've probably heard stories of a 130-pound woman lifting up a car because her son was trapped underneath
Yeah.
it, and that's that when we get scared, when that fear cocktail releases, all the blood rushes out of our digestive system, our pupils dilate so we can take in more light and more color, hearing gets better and the crystals in there, everything changes and gets us ready to fight or flight. That's the reason that people who are in car crashes and people who experience very traumatic events say it was all like slow motion, right? They've got this incredible high density detail
Mhm.
of what happened because you're so much prepped to have a better experience to respond to it to save your life, right? So you can keep procreating those genes.
Yes. And so let's talk about your near death experience at John Hopkins. It sounds like this kind of fits into this spot. Now, you had sought out neuroscientists at Tufts and Harvard. What was the most surprising thing they told you about the switch in our brains that controls courage?
Yeah, so the part of the brain that causes courage or creates courage for those geeks who are interested in the neuroscience is called the SGACC, and it's not at all studied. The amygdala is studied tremendously. Like there's so much research, and you can go online and find all these things in different reports and journals. But the SGACC is much less studied, shown, and there's this great Israeli study about it, about people lying in an MRI machine, one of these big metal tubes that's like a coffin basically, and it's watching what happens on the brain. And what they see in front of them basically is a little toy train track behind them, and it goes back about 20 yards. And on the train track is a basket with a snake inside it, and they have a chance to hit one of two buttons. They can either bring it closer or they can bring it further away, or they can make it go further away. And what they're told to do is bring it as close as they can. And, there's some reward for every foot you bring it closer, you get $100 or something like that. I don't remember what the reward was, but what they found is people who were bringing it closer, their SGACC was lighting up. So they were rewiring their brain for courage. And this is where the saying, neurons that fire together wire together. So the more you practice those courageous acts, the more easy it is for you to access that SGACC. Now, my near death experience forced me in a way to confront this. But what I felt, and I think this is really important for the founders and the entrepreneurs out there, I was so afraid of everything in my life, right? I saw a plane crash when I was 6 years old on TV, and I was terrified. Wouldn't get near an airplane, and missed out on spring break and family reunions and big concerts, and all because I wouldn't fly, or I'd have to drive to places 8, 10, 12 hours away. And when I got diagnosed with this rare form of leukemia, they basically said, we don't know what it is. We've got a treatment that we've got in order, and we'll know within 2 weeks or so if you're going to live or die. And so you might just have 2 weeks to live. We suggest you get your affairs in order and say your goodbyes. So my daughter was a year old. My wife was 6 months pregnant with our second child. And here I am thinking I've got 2 weeks left to live. And the only feeling I felt, Michael, was regret. I thought to myself, I had so many incredible opportunities, but every time I came to one of those decisions, I took the fear route. Right? Get on a plane, come in, be in my best friend's wedding down in Florida. No, okay, and I felt nothing but regret. And then I realized at that moment I'm going to die. And, in your Stoics, I love the Seneca quote, by the way, but when you're Stoics, Marcus Aurelius all the time, memento mori, right? Remember you're going to die. You could die tonight. You could die a year from now. You could die 100 years from now. Who knows? But I never did. I never realized, or I don't know quite how to describe it now. I never faced the fact that I was going to die. I always thought I'd live forever, or I guess that's what I thought if I was careful and if I didn't scare myself. So I decided then and there, Michael, that if I got out of Hopkins, I was going to get over this fear of flying and be the kind of dad my daughter deserved to have. right? She needed to have a dad who could get on a plane and take her to Disney, or get on a plane and take her to see her family in Ireland, or go see the Eiffel Tower. And so I made up my mind at that point that I was going to be that dad. And that physical commitment was exactly what it took. Now, I hope that all your listeners don't have to go through a near death experience. And the good news is I lived. I will tell everyone what happened with me is once I was my immune system built back up and I was able to go out in public and everything else. First place I went was Leesburg Airport, and I signed up for flying lessons. That first day, I think I went to the bathroom like 5 times before we even got to the plane. Right? I was so nervous, and it was terrifying, terrifying. The second flight, we went out over the Blue Ridge Mountains and we hit some turbulence in this little 2-seater airplane, and I think I pooped myself. I mean, just like a little, not a lot. And so the 6th, 7th, 8th time, I'm understanding the physics, I'm learning all this stuff, and I realize I love flying. This is the most fulfilling, most exciting, most challenging thing that I've ever done. And I can't believe this was hidden away from me for 35 years or whatever it was, because I am getting so much enjoyment and fulfillment and challenge out of this that I can't believe that all of my dreams were on the other side of fear. So I got my commercial rating, I got my instrument rating, I got my seaplane rating, and now I fly stunt planes. I do acrobatic competitions.
Before we get back to Patrick and the Buddha Loop, I have a quick favor to ask. If you are finding this conversation helpful and valuable, please take a second and share this episode with 1 or 2 friends who's building something big. Your support helps us keep bringing you these world-class guests. Patrick, you often say fear is fuel, and this goes back to what we were just talking about. Most people will try to avoid fear, but you suggest that we should actually seek fear out on a daily basis. How does this
Yeah.
daily discomfort change our baseline fear cocktail?
So it changes it. So your brain is basically a prediction engine. And we spend all of our waking time and some of our sleeping time too, trying to predict the outcome of every event. And when our prediction is different than what happens in reality, then that creates a shock to the system. That creates fear, and that turns on the amygdala, right? So that's when we have what's called prediction error. Our body, when there's uncertainty and we aren't used to dealing with uncertainty, the body produces what Carl Friston, one of my favorite neuroscientists from University College London, he calls it free energy. And that free energy is the root of all fears. And basically, it comes from the fact that you're unfamiliar with the territory you're in. So this is a key point in the new book, The Founder's Creed, because the really good CEOs, the really good founders, those people who are creating tomorrow's unicorns are incredibly adept at handling uncertainty. And they're fine with it. They're okay with it. And in fact, they have a part of their brain, the founder, the entrepreneur, has a part of their brain that actually triggers dopamine response. Normally, when we get rejection, we have part of that natural instinct, the emotional fear is when we get rejection, then we should get that release of cortisol, the stress hormone. Founders have the ability to trigger their own dopamine response. So when you go into a venture capitalist and you pitch your idea and the venture capitalist says no, a founder, in a very unusual brain mechanism, will release a squirt of dopamine and say, oh, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just afraid of this industry, blah, blah, blah. Because you mentioned at the introduction, the belief gap. So I'll
Yeah,
explain what that is, because
sure.
that's so crucial to how we think, is having that belief, or what you talk about, Michael, every podcast, is having that hope, right?
Yeah.
And belief and hope are quite closely tied together. But if you look at any entrepreneur, they've got a vision of what the world could be. Their vision might be what the world looks like in 5 years. Take Elon Musk as a great example. 15 years ago, he's saying to the rest of the world, I can build a car that's faster than a Porsche, that goes 250 miles on a single charge, that has this beautiful giant screen inside of it, and cost less than $35,000. Everybody in the world said, Elon's over here with this vision. The rest of the world said, you're effing crazy. There's no way. Toyota can't even do a hybrid yet. And you're talking about this full electric that's super fast. So the distance between a founder and his vision or her vision and the rest of the world, that distance is what I call the belief gap, because there's a very small number of people who believe that. It's Elon, it's his first employee, and then he starts to build a bridge across that belief gap by convincing more people, by showing more data, by doing things, by delivering. That's the work for entrepreneurs, and that's the work for founders.
Right. And looking at the word entrepreneur, it's I've Michaelfied it. I looked at the old French words of where it comes from, and it seems to me like it actually means the one who enters before the fear. And
Wow, I
I
like that.
I think that's a very powerful way to look at what an entrepreneur and a founder get to do. Just a reminder that you can get all of our resources, other episodes, and read our blog posts at 5ampodcast.com. Thanks for listening to 5am Podcast, and we want to let you know about Dr. Joseph Drolshagen. Are you in the wrong room? That is where Derek Chinners found himself.
This is not the right room. And so they called me in and they fired me. Immediately called Joseph. He said, what happened? And I said, I think this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. I just got fired.
So, Derek, tell us what happened to your business after you called Dr. Joseph.
That was at least 4 times what we had ever done in a month previous.
See what Dr. Joseph can do for your business. Book a free 15-minute call at 5am.smtmethod.com. Now, you may not 4x your business right away, but ask Dr. Joseph what rapid growth is possible. Stop fighting your strategy and start shifting your identity at 5am.smtmethod.com. We've all heard of the OODA loop, which of course comes from the U.S. Air Force Colonel John Byrd originally, which of course is observe, orient, decide, and act. Can you talk to us about the Buddha loop and what does the B stand for?
Sure. Yeah, Michael, that Colonel John Boyd, who is the top instructor in the Air Force, never got beat. His nickname was 42nd Boyd because he'd bet any other pilot that they could start out on his 6 and he could outmaneuver them within 40 seconds. And if he didn't, he'd buy him a steak dinner. And he never bought the steak dinner.
Never.
But he came up with that decision-making framework called the OODA loop. And as you mentioned before, I've started 5 companies from the first cloud hosting, company before 4 years before AWS that we had full security, and to a bunch of other different companies. But every one I use the OODA loop in some way or another. And one of the things I found is if you use that for your decision-making cycles, you greatly speed up the data that you're getting back and then how you react to it. But there's a problem. Most people don't see the problem because the Air Force took it and adopted it, and it was a huge success. The Marine Corps said, okay, we want to adopt it. We're going to use this as the basis of our new doctrine called maneuver warfare. And then sports teams, and Bill Belichick was, a good example, who started using OODA loop as well. When you try to use it for your business, it doesn't work because there's a component missing. And if you look at any Top Gun pilot, right, any of the best U.S. fighter pilots, they know they have by far the best equipment. They know they've got the most hours training. They know that they've got the highest new technology in the cockpit. They know that they've got the best weaponry systems. So they have an inherent belief that they get, when they join the Air Force, they join the Army or Navy, or it doesn't matter, but they get that right along with their digital camo and the bad haircut, right? It's belief is instilled with them. So you don't need to create belief. Founders and entrepreneurs, Elon over there with his one employee has to create this belief. He has to get everyone to share the same vision. And this is another challenge, but there's a great roadmap in the book, The Founder's Creed, for creating a shared belief map. So every one of your leadership is aligned and going in the same direction and going through these Buddha loops very quickly. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to harness everybody's belief. And you've got internal believers and external believers. So your internal are your employees, your partners, your contractors. External are customers, investors, journalists, analysts. So you've got to get across that belief gap, you've got to harness every all that energy together and get a shared belief map so everyone's on the same page, and then you can start to go through the rest of the OODA loops.
Hmm. Right. Oh, you identify orientation or orient, so the second O, as the most dangerous phase of the Buddha loop. Why
Absolutely.
do you think why do you think founders get stuck here? And how does it maybe lead then to a lack of belief?
Sure. So the reason founders get stuck in the orient phase is because of their past biases. So the belief, if we use the Buddha loop, we start out with belief. Okay, we believe these are our core principles. We believe that in 5 years I'll be able to drive an electric car, and I believe that we'll be able to, or Elon believes we'll be able to get 1,000 people to send a deposit in for that car to reserve their place, and so he has all these beliefs, and then he observes what's going on. There's no other car makers doing what I'm doing. He orients himself based on his background, the physics or whatever. If he's by himself, that orientation is going to stay the same. Then he's going to act. Sorry, then he's going to decide. Then he's going to act. He'll get more information because he acted. So there's no good news. There's no bad news. It's just all data. So that data comes back into that observation component, and then you need to change your orientation to get a different result from going through that loop again. So the way you change your orientation and you try and eliminate some of your own biases are you have people who are with you along that journey, co-founders or early hires, who challenge you to your beliefs, challenge your beliefs and what you think, because you don't want people surrounding you who have the same background, who have the same education, and who agree with everything that you do. You want people behind you that are going to challenge you and be radically accountable for just the data. And this is another thing we talk about in the Founders Creed, is that you have to have a decision-making process in place. So you're being as efficient as possible. This is the Buddha doctrine. But then when you go out to the rest of the team, your leadership team is in 100% agreement. Even if when the doors were closed, you guys were, getting ready to kick and punch each other. But when you get out
Yeah.
and you're bringing a face to the rest of the world, it's got to be a unified front.
Right. So, in your upcoming book, The Founder's Creed, is there a core tenet of that creed that you wished you had known during your first startup?
Yeah, the first startup, the biggest mistake we had was not having a shared belief map. So we had it was myself and four incredibly talented people. And what we're our mission that we had in big bold letters in our data center was secure the internet. And I had this vision. I had built a ton of data centers and understood the architecture behind them. And I thought, well, people don't need data centers. They don't need hardware. They just need computing power. So why can't we put their data in a virtual data center or in the ether? And wasn't smart enough to come up with cloud. Bezos got that one. And so I had this idea. We started executing on it. And I thought all of our four leadership team members were aligned in what we believed. So this is the illusion of alignment that I wish I knew about before. And the illusion of alignment is we were all saying we're super innovative, we're very customer focused, and we're going to secure the internet. And we all believed it. We all had the same things. But when I started talking, we had a leadership retreat, and I started talking to our CTO, brilliant guy, John Broom, JB. He re-architected the Pentagon's network after they got hacked into. So real famous hack. Then they brought in JB to do the re-architecture. So he's a rock star. He's 10 years ahead of everyone else in the industry, and he's thinking, I want super firewalls. I want all this intrusion detection. This is what it means to secure the internet. This is our mission. And then I had Lottie, our COO, Chief Operations Officer, who said, I want to make this thing like a factory. I want to be able to provision 5 servers every hour. I want to be able to check ports automatically. I want this thing to run at scale. And then I thought, okay, well, that's conflicting with putting all this security on there because you
Mhm.
can't be that fast. And then, I'll talk to Sue, our VP of sales, and she said, "Oh, this guy wants a custom thing, so we have to figure out how to customize all these one-offs for people. And this other guy wants this different thing, and it's got to be able to scale from 100 users to 100,000 users when their commercials run on TV." And so everything was different. We all thought the words we were using and the approach we were taking was the same. We all had that illusion of alignment, but really we didn't have any shared beliefs. So that's when I started to come up with this process of separating core ideas from hypothesis. So your core beliefs are things you know to be a fact. For a medical team, it might be that the United States government has said that 30% of the people in the United States have varicose veins. And so you think, okay, well, that's 300 million people, 30%, 90 million people have varicose veins. That's a core fact. That's something that you don't have to test. You understand, and you put out there, and you say, okay, of those 90 million people, I think we can get a 10% market share. So your hypothesis is that you're going to build a company that's going to serve 9 million people. And that's the hypothesis you test every single day, and you come up with a rule that says this is it's what I call in the book the kill switch. If you go through, let's say, 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and you don't see those numbers of clients going up that's going to get you to 9 million, then you hit the kill switch. You say, okay, that hypothesis is wrong. Core belief is still good. That's not going to change because that's a fact, but that hypothesis is wrong. So you're either going to kill it and replace it with something else, or you're going to come up with something new. Now, most good, healthy startups that are going through this Buddha doctrine very quickly will have 3 or 4 core beliefs, and they'll have maybe 5 or 6 hypotheses. And each hypothesis, and this is really critical, Michael, each
Okay.
hypothesis has to be owned by one person. So you can't have multiple people testing or being responsible for the hypothesis.
Yeah. Wow. I like that ownership and that responsibility. That's what it seems like you're getting at there, is that people have to take ownership of the big actions uh, that they're bringing to the table. It made me think of how Thomas Edison, when he was inventing the light bulb, was saying, "Hey, I didn't fail 10,000 times. I just found 10,000 ways it didn't work."
That's it. And that aligns really well, Michael, with my thought that there's no good news, no bad news. It's just data.
Yeah, it's
That's
just
it.
news. Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
Patrick, you have a goal to help create 1,000 unicorns. Is the difference between a mid-market company and a unicorn purely a matter of the founder's belief gap?
No, I think it's a matter of execution and speed. So I've got 5 very good friends who are billionaires who've all created unicorns, and I probably know 10 more through YPO. The 5 guys I know who are my friends all so most companies, let's look at the mid-market companies. Friendster. Do you remember Friendster?
I do. Yes.
Yeah, so that dates you. We're old. We remember Friendster.
Yeah.
So Friendster was the original social network. They had a couple million users. Everyone thought this is revolutionary. Google tried to buy them 3 times, not once, 3 times they tried to buy them unsuccessfully. Friendster was slowing down their Buddha loops, right? So what was happening is because they were getting popular, the system was slowing down, people were timing out, things were going badly. And so what happened, and this happens to a ton of companies, is they got stuck in this analysis paralysis. Well, we can't re-architect. What can we do? Can we move this? Can we open a new data center? Can we put different features? Let's add this feature. And oh, you know what? We should patent this before someone. So they're all over the place, and it was chaos. Absolute chaos. Meanwhile, you've got this startup at Harvard called the Facebook, and they have one rule: move fast and break things. And so that chaos if you get a system like the Buddha doctrine, and a lot of these billionaires I know have used the OODA loop and adopted it as well, that chaos gets replaced by cadence. And that's the critical thing. The difference between mid-market companies and unicorns is the fact that the unicorns are going through their Buddha loops much more quickly. So they're getting much more data before their competitors do. By the time the competitors figure out where they are, they're 2 or 3 moves ahead because they're keeping that chaos. And a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm great at fighting fires." When we have this data center go down, or this production line stops, I'll jump in and I'll fix it. And that's great. And you need to do that. A founder needs to do that when a company is starting. But when you start to get to 500, 1,000 employees, you've got to have that ingrained as a systematic event that happens without you, the founder, being there. It just happens because everyone in the company knows that Buddha doctrine, and they know that we're here for speed, not to get stuck in that analysis paralysis.
Right. And so then, as a former Olympic level rower, you've seen actually how this fear of failure can cause an athlete to dig deep or maybe miss a start. How do you coach founders to visualize the crisis so that they respond rather than react?
Sure. So again, this is based in Stoic philosophy as well, right? Cato, the famous senator, used to walk around the marketplace in servants' togas without shoes on his feet. Right, when all the other senators have, fancy sandals and gold-laden togas and everything else. And so, what that comes down to is understanding everything that could go wrong and expecting it. Because that does a couple things that we've already talked about in the podcast, Michael. It reduces your prediction error, right? If you look at the worst thing that could happen and you figure out how you'd handle it, then it doesn't come as a surprise, right? You're not triggering a lot of free energy. So you just start to deal with the outcome that you've got, in front of you. So that's a big part of it. And you can do that through visualization, right? Just meditating every night before you go to bed or when you wake up in the morning, doing a bunch of deep breathing, and then you start to see your problem, and you focus on it and you see all the different outcomes. I remember when I was at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, they do all sorts of stuff. They're always pulling blood, and you've got, VO2 max testing going on, and it's always painful, and you always feel like a guinea pig. But they had Shane Murphy used to be the head sports psychologist at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. And Shane would get us in there, and the first time I went, he had this pod. Right, it was about the size of a Volkswagen, and you sit inside of it, and there's a bunch of speakers, and you're hearing, the noise of the water and race day, and then Shane starts talking to you. He's like, breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth, relax your shoulders, relax your chest, and then kind of gets you down into this hypnotic state. And the first week or so, it was amazing. It was, okay, Sweeney, you're off the line first. You had a great start. Your boat feels super light and you feel like you're walking on the water. You're pulling away from the German guy. You're half a length up. And it's like this. It's all roses, right? It's all beautiful the first week as he teaches you how to do visualization. Then the second week we start and he's like, "Oh, we got a little something different today." I'm like, "Okay, great. Can't wait to jump in and get it done." He starts out the same way. And then he said, "You hit a buoy with your oar and you're in last place. The German guy's 6 lengths ahead." And I'm thinking, what the hell? What happened to this? We were supposed to be nice and visualizing good things. And in fact, once you get good at visualizing good things, then you visualize all the bad things. And that's what he was teaching us. And I went to Lucerne, Switzerland that summer for one of the World Cup races. They were doing a bunch of races, the initial heats, doing them one after the other. And a official came down in his motorboat right as I was racing up about halfway through and just gave me this tremendous wake, right? So it bobbled me, and normally I would have flipped out, right? Because it's unfair. I'm on the outside lane. I got this wake, blah blah blah. And I just laughed. I was in the boat laughing because that was one of the scenarios that Shane came up with that I'd visualize. And he said, "Okay, now you get yourself together, take that first stroke, the second stroke. Now you're feeling good and light." And that's exactly what happened. I mean, I didn't win the race, but I went from last place to third place, and it was a great lesson in being able to expect the worst and knowing that you're ready for it when it happens.
Right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, today we're chatting with Patrick Sweeney, and we have that comment section, and we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback on our conversation so far. Patrick, someone's comment to me might be, Michael, tell me how I can get in touch with Patrick. So how can our people get in touch with you?
Sure. Well, the new book, the Founder's Creed, is on Amazon, so they can find the Founder's Creed on Amazon or thefounderscreed.com. And then for me personally, I'd encourage anyone who has questions or is interested in the Buddha doctrine or the Fear is Fuel. On LinkedIn, I'm the Fear Guru. So Patrick Sweeney, and it's just slash the Fear Guru. Same thing on Instagram. And then on X, PJ Sweeney, Sweeny.
That's good. I'm going to go back to something that we discussed kind of at the top of this conversation, and it was about how much energy the brain uses. So, in your research, or maybe this is also something that you talk with your clients about, what's the best way to fuel your brain and what's the best fuel for your brain?
It's a great question, and it's something I advise a lot of CEOs on when I'm, coming in to do a workshop or coming in to help them with strategy sessions. And the biggest, single most factor that's important is sleep. The quality and the length of your sleep are the two most important things you can focus on as an entrepreneur to allow the brain to heal itself every night. The second thing that I tell everyone is the first hour in the morning is your golden hour. So your neurons and synapses have reset themselves over the period of sleep if you've had good sleep. So now you've got this brain that's ready to learn, that's ready to be creative. So every morning when I wake up, I speak French and a little bit of Italian. Every morning when I wake up, if I don't have a project that I'm working on that has a deadline or something, I'll do 30 minutes of language and then 30 minutes usually of studying a little, something like the Tao or the Stoics or what have you. And that first hour sets you up for a much better day than someone who wakes up in the morning and is checking Instagram, or TikTok immediately because that's just doing the opposite. That's feeding that dopamine addiction. So the sleep, using that golden hour in the morning, and then exercise. I've told my kids since they were 5 years old, if you have an important test or something important with school, go out, take a walk, run around the building a couple of times if you can, and get some exercise because your brain gets fueled and there's an oxygen barrier, blood-brain barrier that when you exercise opens up more, so your brain gets more oxygen. Those are three little neuroscience tips.
That's good. On your website, do you have the breathing exercises information as well?
I don't, I should put that up there, but I don't on the web. So my personal website is pjsweeney.com, and and I talk about a lot of this stuff in the blogs. But I should do maybe YouTube on the breathing or something. It's a good idea.
Yeah. We'll leave that. People can get in touch with you and look for that. I need to ask you about the time that you crossed the Atacama Desert, one of the driest places on Earth. Now, I think you were using only non-modern transportation. And ladies and gentlemen, this was a 273-mile journey. What did that journey teach you about the limits of human endurance versus the limits of the mind?
That's a great question, Michael. So that was such a fun time with Joe DeSena, who is the CEO of Spartan. He was the one who invited me down to face that, and I had just done the Iditarod, which it's a race across
Okay.
Alaska. Yeah,
Yeah.
that goes from Anchorage to Nome. And the week before the sled dogs do it, they allow people either on fat bikes or on skis to do it beforehand. And so I did the 350-mile version, and the first night was minus 35. And Michael, you might ask, minus 35 Celsius or minus 35 Fahrenheit?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. When it's
Right.
that cold, those two are together and they agree that it's just cold as hell. It wasn't long after that I went to the Atacama with Joe, and it's the same thing, but dramatically different, right? Drier, hotter. We were on horses for a while, we were on bikes for a while, we're on foot. And it's all about, and this is when you compress your Buddha loop, right? Because Joe and I both believe we could do anything we want. If we think we're going to cross the Atacama Desert, we believe we can do it. Now we've got to convince other people to do it with us. We're no different, and I say this about my friends who are billionaires. They're no different than you or me, Michael. And what they are willing to do is be an entrepreneur, be a founder, because every morning it's like chewing glass for breakfast, right? It doesn't get any easier. So if you're going to do it, it's just as easy to build $100 million company as it is to build a $1 million company, right? It's just different levels, different expectations, different beliefs. And when things get tough on any adventure, whether it's the Atacama, whether it's Iditarod, you compress your Buddha loop to what's exactly in front of you. So I think, okay, if I can go 10 steps with 10 deep breaths, because we're at altitude here too, I'm going to do 10. I'm just going to count 10. 1, 2, knock through it. Okay, 10 more, 10 more, 10 more. And that's it. And by the time you know it, you've crossed 350 miles, or 277 miles, or whatever it is, by compressing that belief, because you believe you can do 10 more steps. I'm going to watch this. I'm looking at the train. I see it. I'm going to orient myself. I decided to take 10 steps. I acted. Boom. It worked. I can do it again. I believe I can do it again. And that's it. And you just start going through those Buddha loops.
Yeah, that's really good. It reminds me of our first episode of 26, which was with Meyer Ezra. And he talked about his experience growing up, the deformity he was born with, and being in the IDF. And he said, Michael, I decided I could do anything for 5 seconds. And then I just do it for another 5 seconds. So there might be somebody listening who's saying, I kind of feel like I'm getting close to writing the last chapter in my book, my story of life, and I feel like it's too late. What do you say to those people that to help them realize there's many more chapters for them to write and it's not too late?
100%. It is never too late. And you look at some of the greatest entrepreneurs and most enduring companies, and I'll give you one that I love: Kentucky Fried Chicken. Colonel
Yeah.
Sanders was the founder of Kentucky Fried Chicken. He started that company when he was 55 years old. Now, that's just anecdotal, but what's evidence and what's database, which is how I always like to decide, is that founders who are between 45 and 55 have a 300% higher chance of having a successful outcome, a successful exit with their business, than founders who are younger than 40. So the age actually helps. And what else helps, which is counterintuitive in this kind of world of tiger moms, and Tiger Woods is a good example. That Tiger Woods, everyone said, oh, he was 3 years old on TV swinging a golf club. He won his first tournament at 4 years old. It's all he did was golf. Focus, focus, focus. Well, the opposite is really true. So that's anecdotal. If you look at most of the other great athletes, they've always done other sports, right? They've done things when they were young to try, try ice hockey, try skiing, try rock climbing, try mountain biking, do a little bit of everything. And that creates someone like Roger Federer, best tennis player, in history, most wins and everything else. His mother was a tennis instructor, but he was playing soccer way more than he was playing tennis when he was growing up. And he was playing badminton and table tennis and, running cross country and all this stuff. And he didn't focus on tennis till he was in high school, right? He was doing all these general things. So if you adopt that same mindset to founders, Michael, and you're thinking you're in the last chapter of your life, you're just at the point where you've got all these tremendous dots that you can connect and create something really cool, because you've had experience in so many different ways that others haven't, right? So your orientation, that second O, is going to be huge because of all your experiences. And you think, oh, yeah, but it was a shitty experience. It was bad outcome. No, it doesn't matter, because that's data that's going to make this next experience fantastic for you.
That's right. And it's kind of that question of outcome versus experience. And
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
many of us have to realize It's about the experience, not the outcome. And ladies and gentlemen, just think that you're working on volume 1 and get ready for volume 2. There's a whole lot more chapters that you get to write. So, Patrick, thank you so much for showing us that fear isn't actually something to be escaped, but something to be harnessed. Thank you so much for joining me today for the 5 a.m. podcast.
Michael, thank you very much for having me. And thank your listeners and viewers for spending the time with us. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And so, ladies and gentlemen, as you're listening, you're picking up what Patrick is laying down. I'm sure of it. And one other thing you got to pick up is his new book, The Founder's Creed. You can find that at thefounderscreed.com. Make sure there's actually a discount code. There's a bunch of X's, 5 of them, 5 X's. And I think there's a song written about that, and that's why someone lives in Tennessee. But you get 20% off with that discount code and those 5 X's. And you can even download a free chapter today to start your own unicorn journey. So please, ladies and gentlemen, seize your day. Enjoy those sunrises and sunsets and all those beautiful adventures in between. I'm Michael Clausen, and we'll see you next time on the 5 a.m. podcast. Thanks for watching the show. Just a reminder that you can get all of our resources, other episodes, and read our blog posts at 5ampodcast.com. We want to let you know about Dr. Joseph Drolshagen. Are you in the wrong room? That is where Derek Chinners found himself.
I'm in the wrong room. This is not the right room. And so they call me in and they fire me. I immediately called Joseph. He said, what happened? And I said, I think this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. I just got fired.
So, Derek, tell us what happened to your business after you called Dr. Joseph.
I think that was at least 4 times what we had ever done in a month previous.
See what Dr. Joseph can do for your business. Book a free 15-minute call at 5am.smtmethod.com. Now, you may not 4x your business right away, but ask Dr. Joseph what rapid growth is possible. Stop fighting your strategy and start shifting your identity at 5am.smtmethod.com.